Today's video is brought to you by Surfshark, so think of the internet like a giant open plan office. Everything you do kind of is what someone walks past, they're like, oh, hello, what are you doing in your work time? Browsing Reddit, are we? Are we? It's all public unless you put up some walls. Surfshark, well, they're those walls, aren't they? Surfshark is a VPN that hides your real IP address. It encrypts your online activity and makes public Wi-Fi pretty much as safe as your home network. You can even make it look like you're browsing from another country, which is great for unlocking extra content or stuff that's not available in your region necessarily. It comes loaded with features like Clean Web, which blocks ads, trackers, malicious links before they load. There's multi-hop, so you can go through 2 servers for extra privacy, and you can use it on unlimited devices, which is fantastic because, I don't know, we live in a world, it's got so many devices. I'm looking at 3 devices now which could use Surfshark. This one does, because it's my main phone. I don't think my teleprompter tablet really needs it. But it could. I could have unlimited devices. Go to surfshark.com/ITS or use the code ITS at checkout to get 4 extra months of Surfshark completely for free. And now back to today's episode. April the 2nd, 1992. A Bosniak woman lies dead on a sidewalk in Bijeljina. Above her corpse, a uniformed fighter kicks her lifeless body while his comrades watch approvingly. American photographer Ron Haviv captures the moment that would become one of the defining images of the Yugoslav wars. The man doing the kicking belongs to Arkan's Tigers, officially known as the Serbian Volunteer Guard, the most professional and brutal paramilitary force in the Balkans. Over 4 years of systematic terror, these 4,000 fighters would murder more than 1,000 civilians while ethnically cleansing tens of thousands more from Croatia and Bosnia. Unlike the chaotic militias that sprouted during Yugoslavia's collapse, the Tigers operated with military precision, backed by state resources and trained by Yugoslav army instructors. Yet, despite overwhelming evidence of war crimes, including photographic evidence and survivor testimony, virtually every Tiger escaped justice. Arkan himself was assassinated in 2000 before facing trial, taking his secrets to the grave. And yet their legacy endures through the fractured landscapes and altered face of the Balkans today. Understanding how the Yugoslav war's most systematic ethnic cleansing campaign emerged first requires examining the criminal mind that conceived it, as well as how he became so infamous. The transformation of Zeljko Ražnatović from international bank robber to state-sponsored warlord represents one of the most chilling examples of how criminal expertise can be weaponized for genocide. His decades of perfecting violence, deception, escape, and ultimately population control weren't merely background. They were the foundation for creating the Balkans' most effective killing machine. Born in 1952 to a Yugoslav Air Force officer, Arkan's descent into criminality began early. By the time he was in his mid-teens, he had already been arrested for theft and assault, displaying both the violence and malevolence that would characterize his adult life. After escaping from juvenile detention, his father thought that only military service could instill the discipline that he needed, and so he signed him up for the Yugoslav Navy. Arkan, however, had no intention of serving. At just 18, he ran away and didn't look back. He made his way west, where he carried out ever-daring heists throughout Belgium, the Netherlands, Sweden, and Germany throughout the 70s. What quickly distinguished Arkan from ordinary criminals was both his meticulous planning as well as his flair for the theatrical, as he developed a reputation for leaving roses at crime scenes as a sort of signature. His first major score came in 1974 with a bank robbery in Liège in Belgium, netting him what would be tens of thousands in today's currency. These activities did get him caught once or twice, but he taught himself how to be something of an escape artist from multiple prisons. His breakouts became the stuff of legend in European criminal circles. The 1979 escape from Vosselar prison in Belgium involved a carefully orchestrated operation where accomplices threw weapons over the prison wall during a staged riot. He developed a reputation as an unstoppable force, and not a force for good. By the early 1980s, even he couldn't avoid the heat from the trail he was leaving behind. After his escape from a maximum security Swiss prison in 1983, he returned back to his home in Yugoslavia, where he thought he would be safe from prosecution given his status as one of Interpol's most wanted criminals. His criminal career began to take a darker turn around this time, though, when the country's secret police, the UDBA, reportedly recruited him as an assassin. This offered both sides exactly what they needed. For Arkan, he received what effectively became immunity from international prosecution. For Yugoslavia, they got the loyalty of an incredibly successful criminal who they could put on jobs that were deemed too controversial for official state agents. This arrangement transformed him from a common criminal into a valuable state asset, a man who understood violence, possessed international connections, and demanded loyalty from his associates. The looming collapse of Yugoslavia provided the perfect storm for Arkan's continued metamorphosis. Without Tito's forceful presence holding the country together, the Federation began unraveling amid resurgent nationalism among various ethnic minorities and growing economic catastrophe. By 1989, the country had reached a point of hyperinflation that had reached 2,400% annually, wiping out savings and creating mass unemployment that soared above 20% throughout much of the country. The economic devastation hit different republics unequally, fueling resentment between Yugoslavia's various ethnic groups. Slovenia and Croatia, the wealthiest in the Union, increasingly resented subsidizing poorer regions through federal transfer payments. Serbia, historically dominant in the military and bureaucracy, feared losing its position as the Federation decentralized. By 1990, communist ideology, the glue that held the increasingly fractious Union together, had completely lost its legitimacy, replaced by competing nationalist movements that portrayed ethnic coexistence as impossible. Constitutional crises deepened these tensions. The 1974 Yugoslav constitution had granted substantial autonomy to areas inside the Serbian Republic, namely Kosovo and Vojvodina, which became increasingly controversial amidst the resurgent nationalism. The newly elected Serbian president, Slobodan Milosevic, was an unapologetic nationalist who projected, more than anything, visions of a greater Serbia with little thought or care for the continuation of Yugoslavia. Milosevic's vision of Greater Serbia was, from the outset, clearly not going to be something that could be peacefully implemented. The territories he was claiming to be rightfully Serbian were home to millions of non-Serbs who had no intention of either accepting what they viewed as oppressive Serb rule or leaving their homes. In Kosovo, ethnic Albanians comprised roughly 90% of the population. In Croatia's Krajina, Serbs were a majority, but surrounded by Croat communities. For its part, Bosnia's population was less than one-third Serb, yet Milosevic's ideology demanded these lands become part of an expanded Serbian state. The truth was inescapable. Creating an ethnically homogeneous Serbian territory along the lines Milosevic wanted would require removing millions of non-Serbs through either terror, deportation, or both. And this did not remain in the theoretical stage for very long. By 1989, Milosevic had already begun to plan out just how to achieve this. Milosevic, consolidating power in Serbia, recognized that conventional military forces would not be enough for the ethnic wars he was planning. Yugoslavia was an immensely diverse place, and while Serbs did have a plurality, they were just over a third of the country. It's hardly an overwhelming majority. And let's be clear, there was no doubt that Yugoslavia's military would be on the front lines of the conflict, siding completely with Serbia's goals, however evil they may have been. But their actions represented the state itself, which Milosevic was concerned about given the scale and scope of his plans. To back up the military, and push in ways they couldn't afford to, he needed a paramilitary group. And this is where Arkan enters today's picture again. In the late 1980s, Serbia's Interior Ministry had already enlisted him to control the football team Red Star Brigade's ultra-nationalist fan group, the Deleji. Arkan kept watch and ran lower-level crime operations with these men from the back of an ice cream parlor in Belgrade, which was mostly a cover for their nocturnal activities. Many of these men were unemployed with little better to do with themselves and found some sort of purpose and meaning in him. On October 11th, 1990, 20 of these young men joined Arkan at the Pokajnica monastery in central Serbia for a ceremony that would formalize their transformation from football hooligans into instruments of genocide. Here, they swore an oath to, quote, lay down my life to save Serbdom, and pledged to defend Serbs, again quoting, wherever they were in Yugoslavia. What distinguished the Serbian Volunteer Guard from other paramilitaries was their immediate collaboration with Yugoslavia's military establishment. The Yugoslav People's Army provided not just weapons, but professional military instructors to train recruits at the captured Erdut facility in eastern Croatia. It was clear from the outset that this was not going to be a group of ragtag rebels with rusting rifles. Quite the opposite. They received armored vehicles, mortars, and anti-tank weapons that made them some of the most well-armed forces in the conflict, despite their comparatively smaller numbers. By early 1991, what had started as just 20 volunteers had expanded to over 200 elite fighters, supported by direct supply lines to the Yugoslav army's stockpiles. Arkan had successfully transformed criminal networks into military assets and state resources into personal power. The foundation was laid for a campaign of terror that would see him leave marks on the region that would carry forward for generations to come. Now, when Croatia declared independence in June 1991, Arkan's Tigers were deployed almost immediately to eastern Slavonia, where they would write the first chapter in what would become something of a systematic manual for ethnic cleansing and brutality. Their initial testing grounds were to be the small village of Dal near the Croatian-Serbian border. In August that year, when Serb forces overran the local Croat soldiers and took control of the police station, Arkan's men demonstrated that accepting surrender from their enemy was not part of their doctrine. They executed dozens of Croat policemen and defenders who had already laid down their arms as a deliberate act of terror designed to spread fear far beyond any other tactical objective. They wanted to establish their reputation as a force willing to commit atrocities even after victory had been assured. This was not conventional warfare, and they never set out for conventional warfare. This was psychological warfare with a strategic purpose. While the Yugoslav People's Army fought conventional battles alongside regular territorial forces, the Tigers served as Milosevic's instrument for demographic transformation. The message was clear. Those who stayed to defend their communities would not simply be defeated, they would be eliminated, even after surrender. But the Tigers weren't operating in isolation. Regular army units coordinated closely with the Tigers during major operations, sharing intelligence and logistics while providing heavy weapons that transformed them from a militia into a mechanized fighting force. They also operated alongside numerous other paramilitaries that emerged during Yugoslavia's collapse, though none achieved their level of operational effectiveness or enjoyed the same level of support from the state. Vojislav Sesel's White Eagles drew fighters from Chetnik nostalgia, while Mirko Jovic's White Wolves were various local militias carved out in their own territories. But these groups had their own political agenda, something the Tigers were rather unique for. While they were, of course, very nationalist, they had an almost cult-like admiration for their leader, who had demonstrated time and again complete loyalty to Milosevic. This made them the perfect proxy for operations too controversial for the army. The rapid escalations that came in the early days of the war showed Arkan that he was going to need men, a lot more than the 20 he had initially rounded up. This wasn't a problem, given their generous benefactors, though. Within months, they had expanded to a force of 200 volunteers, all of whom went through extensive training at their Erdut facility, who transformed wayward men into elite soldiers who were combat ready. If you thought their initial interaction with the police in Daesh was bad, they were just getting started. The nearby village of Tenya, the next target, would reveal the true scope of the Tigers' methodology. In July 1991, this mixed community of Croats and Serbs that had coexisted for generations became something of a laboratory for perfecting ethnic cleansing techniques. Arkan's fighters systematically murdered at least 29 non-Serb civilians and forced no fewer than 2,900 residents to abandon their homes forever. Within weeks, a village that had been home to multiple ethnicities for generations had been rendered entirely homogenous, a Serb stronghold built on the bones of its former neighbors. This forced demographic transformation was what the Tigers would become known for. Battle lines constantly shift during conventional wars, but population replacement proves much harder to reverse. When entire ethnic communities are forced out, they aren't always eager to return, especially if they don't have anything to return home to. The Tigers understood that effective ethnic cleansing required not just military victory, but permanent psychological trauma that would prevent survivors from even considering a return. The efficiency was staggering. The results were permanent. Like the post-World War II transformation of so much of Europe, the Tigers' systematic terror created ethnic maps that proved more durable than any subsequent peace deal could reverse. Mixed communities that had lived together peacefully were displaced within days of their arrival. Bosnia-Herzegovina was next to declare independence in early 1992, and the Tigers crossed the Drina River, carrying with them lessons learned in Croatia. On April 1, 1992, before war had even been formally declared, Arkan's fighters spearheaded the assault on Bijeljina, a strategically located town in eastern Bosnia. They had been invited by the local Serb politician Bijeljina Plavsic, who later admitted during her own war crimes trial that the goal was to homogenize the town. What followed became one of the most well-documented episodes of ethnic cleansing in the Yugoslav wars, largely because American journalist Ron Haviv embedded with the Tigers to document their operations, although it's unclear what potential gain they thought they would achieve through this. The most infamous photograph shows a tiger triumphantly kicking the corpse of a Bosnian woman who had just been shot dead on the sidewalk, not for having done anything wrong, but for the crime of who she was. And this was not an isolated case either. There were regular acts of violence and performative acts of dominance designed to be witnessed and remembered. At least 48 people were murdered in Bijeljina during the first 2 days of April, most of whom were civilians who posed zero military threat. And this killing was only the opening salvo for what the group wanted to put on in the town. Their goal was once again to erase the non-Serbian presence from the town. Houses and shops owned by Muslims were systematically looted and torched. All mosques in the area were demolished in violent acts of cultural destruction. 9 separate detention camps were established for those who remained. Those who lived through the Tigers' rampage carry memories of the events to this day. Josef Tribic, a Bosniak resident of Bijeljina, recalled being beaten black and blue overnight while witnessing execution-style killings of other prisoners around him. It was the randomness that was the most traumatizing. Life and death seemed to hang in the balance of a soldier's whim. There were certain patterns to the targeting, though. The Tigers systematically hunted down what they called flower girls, beautiful women who became particular objects of cruelty. While they would be neither the first nor the last to use mass rape as a method of population control, they were nevertheless a part of it. It was psychological warfare designed to traumatize entire families. From Bijeljina, the Tigers fanned out across northern Bosnia with alarming speed, implementing their proven methods in town after town. In Zvornik, along the Drina River, they helped reduce the Bosniak population from 60% to virtually zero within months through coordinated expulsions and mass killings. In Brčko, they worked with local Serb forces to expel thousands, while specifically targeting community leaders, intellectuals, teachers, and religious figures, those most likely to organize resistance or preserve cultural memory of a multi-ethnic life. The Tigers had learned that effective ethnic cleansing required more than just killing and expelling people. It demanded complete destruction of the infrastructure that made diverse communities possible. Schools were burned, libraries destroyed, and even cemeteries were desecrated to erase evidence that non-Serbs had ever lived in these places. The goal was not just demographic change, but historical amnesia, ensuring that future generations would have no physical reminders of the ethnic complexity that had existed here for centuries. These were Serbian lands, and always had been, as far as they were concerned. Now, realistically, we have to recognize the success that the group had. While they weren't the only factor at play here in terms of pushing, often with force, for a more ethnically homogenous territory, they nevertheless had an enormous impact. By midsummer 1992, the Tigers had largely withdrawn from Bosnia as the conflict became more structured, and foreign volunteer units were being absorbed into regular forces. Arkan himself pivoted toward politics, founding the Party of Serbian Unity, while his fighters remained in reserve at their Erdut base. This transition was not accidental. International pressure was mounting for Serbia to distance itself from paramilitary operations, and Arkan's entry into formal politics provided useful cover while maintaining his unit's readiness. During this 3-year period, from 1992 to 1995, the Tigers maintained their Erdut base and conducted smaller operations, but Arkan focused primarily on building his political career and business empire through war profiteering and sanctions-dodging networks. This relative quiet wasn't going to last, though. In September 1995, as Croatian offensives had progressively shattered Serb defenses and created a massive refugee crisis, desperate local commanders in Sanski Most invited Arkan back for one final campaign. The town in northwestern Bosnia suddenly found itself on the front line of advancing Bosnian government forces, and Serb authorities called in the Tigers as a fire brigade force to halt the offensive. Arkan answered the call with approximately 200 of his most experienced fighters, establishing headquarters in the Hotel Sarnas, where he installed himself in the manager's office to direct operations. The Tigers imposed martial law, setting up checkpoints and enforcing curfews, while forcibly conscripting every able-bodied Serb male refugee that they could find. The days of eager recruits were fading, replaced with a all-hands-on-deck mentality that fell along ethnic lines. The Tigers, originally set up to be the defenders of the Serbs, were now arguing that Serbs had to be their defenders. Their attention turned within days to the remaining non-Serb civilians. Under the pretext of searching for saboteurs, the Tigers conducted systematic sweeps through neighborhoods, detaining Muslim civilians and looting homes. On September 20th, 1995, according to evidence later gathered by war crimes investigators, Arkan's men rounded up 12 Bosniak men, transported them to the village of Trnovo, and executed 11 of them. One man miraculously survived to provide testimony, though the sources don't specify exactly why he was spared, whether through luck, being overlooked during the execution, or managing to escape during the chaos. The survivor's testimony would later form part of the ICTY's case against Arkan. The following day, brought an even more horrific massacre. Tigers seized 67 non-Serb civilians, 66 men and 1 woman from Sanski Most and surrounding villages, loaded them onto trucks and drove them to a remote location in the village of Cecina. There they lined up their captives and machine-gunned them en masse. 65 people died in that field. Only 2 survived by crawling away wounded under the cover of darkness. These executions at Sanski Most represented the culmination of the Tigers' evolution from opportunistic paramilitaries into professional practitioners of ethnic cleansing, demonstrating their mastery of methodical terror. The killing was methodical, efficient, and designed to send a message that resonated far beyond the immediate victims. This wasn't genocide on the scale of Hitler's final solution, because it didn't have to be. Their goal was to terrify the population into fleeing without having to kill everyone they could find, a more efficient form of demographic transformation that achieved permanent results through selective brutality. By early October 1995, however, Bosnian government forces had overrun the area despite Arkan's presence, forcing the Tigers to retreat along with the panicked remnants of the Serb army and thousands of refugees towards Prijedor and Banja Luka. It was their last major engagement. When the Dayton Peace Accords ended the Bosnian War in November 1995, Arkan's Tigers had spent less than 4 years in active operation. Yet in that brief span, they had permanently altered the demographic landscape of multiple nations, transforming mixed communities through systematic terror. While their primary theatre of operations was Croatia and Bosnia, Tigers were also linked to limited operations in Kosovo during the 1998-99 conflict, though the unit was officially disbanded by then. The rivers of blood that flowed in their wake were not accidental casualties of war. They were the deliberate strategy of men who understood that properly applied terror could redraw the ethnic map of the Balkans forever. The war that had given birth to Arkan's Tigers ended with the Dayton Peace Accords in November 1995, but their story was far from over. On April the 20th, 1996, at a ceremony designed for maximum publicity, Arkan officially disbanded the Serbian Volunteer Guard. Standing in front of his men at their air base, he proclaimed their retirement from the battlefield, pinning medals on chests as a reward for their actions over the past several years, and as an acknowledgement for what was for him a job well done. The formal dissolution was partly theatre. International pressure on war crimes investigations were mounting, but it nevertheless marked the end of one of the most effective instruments of state-sponsored terror in post-war Europe. Crucially, though, disbandment did not mean disappearance. For the 4,000 men who had served under Arkan's command, the end of the war simply meant the beginning of new careers. Their trajectories would reveal how easily violence transitions from battlefield to civilian life when justice fails to intervene, something common in the aftermath of conflicts, but especially the case here. 3 distinct paths emerged. Integration into Serbia's official security apparatus, which raised a whole new series of dilemmas for the new state on the world stage, evolution into an organized crime network, and quiet civilian reintegration. Arkan, never one to be accused of being a follow-up, launched something of a reinvention campaign for himself. His marriage to pop star Svetlana Raznatovic in 1995 served as something of a launchpad for his remake. She enjoyed massive popularity among Serbian audiences, and their wedding was a big deal in the country, broadcast live on TV. Who would question his would-be folk hero status given his marriage to the nation's sweetheart? And he'd actually laid the groundwork for his political career while the war was still going on, but by 1997, he'd secured himself a seat in Serbia's parliament. By some twisted fate, he was representative for Kosovo, the elected voice for Albanian populations that his forces had terrorized. The majority Albanian population had declared their own parallel parliament at the time due to the fallout between themselves and the Serbs, resulting in the mass disenfranchisement of the new Serbian parliament, which was filled by the tiny Serb minority, specifically men like Arkan. Despite his PR facelift, though, Arkan was the same man as ever, a criminal operating under state protection. His post-war business empire began to expand beyond just his activities in the Tigers, built on a combination of spoils left over from the war, as well as systematic extortion. His acquisition of the FK Oblic football club in Belgrade stands as one of the best examples here. A success turnaround story so dramatic that it would almost be funny if not for the tragedy behind it, like everything else in his empire. Upon acquisition, the team existed in total obscurity. Many had never even heard of them. but through what we have to admit is nothing short of an incredible reign of terror, complete with referees receiving death threats, opposing players suffering mysterious injuries, and rival team managers finding themselves facing consistent intimidation campaigns, they ended up winning the 1998 Yugoslav Championship. This was some General Aladdin level rigging. Meanwhile, many of Arkan's most experienced fighters found new purpose in Serbia's evolving security apparatus. The Special Operations Unit, formed in 1996 and known as the Red Berets, became something of a refuge for ex-paramilitary soldiers whose skills remained valuable to the state. Under the command of Milorad Ulmek, himself a former Tiger, the unit took in dozens of former Arkan veterans. This integration wasn't accidental. The professional military training the Tigers had received, combined with the first-hand experience they gained terrorizing local populations, had transformed them into skilled warriors, and these skills were seen as being useful to the new Serbian security apparatus. Forget about criminal prosecution, these men were now carrying official state badges and drew government salaries. Legere himself embodied this transition. Rising through the ranks to command the Red Berets, he maintained the tight discipline and operational effectiveness that had distinguished the Tigers. The unit's deployment to Kosovo in 1999, during which they proceeded to use many of the same tactics that the former Tiger organization did during the Bosnian War, demonstrated that Yugoslavia had learned nothing from the previous decade and were now just carrying them out through their official organizations. Now, the international community hadn't turned a blind eye towards this, although they might as well have for all of the good that their focus accomplished. The International Criminal Tribunal had secretly indicted Arkan in 1997, charging him with crimes against humanity for his role in systematic murder, rape, and ethnic cleansing. The indictment remained sealed. Prosecutors hoped to arrest him during one of his increasingly rare international travels. But Arkan's movements were carefully monitored by Serbian security forces, and he rarely left Belgrade. International pressure mounted dramatically, though, in 1999. The Kosovo War brought renewed scrutiny to Yugoslavia's use of paramilitaries, and NATO's bombing campaign further isolated Milosevic's regime. By late 1999, it was clear that Milosevic's grip on power was weakening. Mass demonstrations in Belgrade, led by the democratic opposition, were gaining momentum. Western governments began openly calling for regime change, and Serbian security officials started calculating their own survival. For Arkan, this represented an existential threat. As one of the most visible symbols of the regime's war crimes, he faced the prospect of being sacrificed to appease international demands for justice. Former allies began distancing themselves, and even his state protectors recognized that his continued presence posed a liability to their own futures. The end came on January 15, 2000, in Belgrade's Intercontinental Hotel. As Arkan sat in the lobby, two masked gunmen entered and fired 11 shots into his body. He died instantly, along with one of his bodyguards. The assassination, carried out with precision and followed by a clean escape, bore the hallmarks of a professional operation orchestrated by those who understood that the old Yugoslavia was dying and that its most notorious war criminal could not be allowed to testify about his state handlers. The timing was hardly coincidental. Milosevic's government would fall 8 months later, and incoming democratic leaders had already signaled their willingness to cooperate with international tribunals. Arkan, dead, could never testify about his state handlers, never reveal the full scope of official complicity in his crimes. His death ensured that the most direct link between Belgrade and systematic war crimes was permanently severed. Thousands attended his funeral, where Serbian Orthodox priests blessed the casket of a man responsible for some of the worst atrocities in European history since World War II. The ceremony revealed how completely Arkan had succeeded in his transformation, from international fugitive to martyred patriot, in the span of a decade. In the years following Arkan's assassination, there remained a possibility that his followers might finally face justice. Serbian Prime Minister Zoran Đinđić was preparing to cooperate more fully with the ICTY, potentially opening files that could implicate hundreds of paramilitaries in war crimes for prosecution. For the first time since the wars ended, it seemed that the Tiger's impunity might be coming to an end. But that possibility, it died with Đinđić. On March 12, 2003, he was killed by a sniper's bullet outside the government building in Belgrade. The operation's mastermind was Milorad Ulmek, the same former Tiger who now commanded Serbia's elite special police. Former Tigers had assassinated the one political leader who might have brought justice for their wartime crimes. Their 40-year sentences were for murdering a prime minister, not for the thousands of civilians they had killed during the wars. What became abundantly clear after Đinđić's death was that virtually none of Arkan's followers would ever face any consequences for their wartime crimes. Today, this pattern of impunity continues unabated. The 2023 dossier released by Belgrade's Humanitarian Law Center identified 189 former members of the Serbian Volunteer Guard by name. Despite overwhelming evidence of their participation in war crimes, not one has faced trial in a Serbian court. The case of Srdan Max Golbovic perfectly encapsulates this reality. Photographed by Ron Haviv kicking the corpse of a Bosniak woman in Bijeljina's streets, Golbovic became one of the most recognizable faces of ethnic cleansing. Today, he works as a DJ in Belgrade's nightclub scene, spinning records under his wartime nickname. When Bosnia issued an indictment for the crimes in the mid-2010s, Serbia simply refused extradition. Serbia maintains an official posture of historical revisionism that treats the Tigers as patriots, not war criminals. Veterans associations organize commemorative events without interference from authorities. Graffiti praising Arkan's men appears on Belgrade's walls with remarkable regularity. The state that created the Tigers now honors their memory while denying their crimes. As the authors of the 2023 Humanitarian Law Center dossier noted with bitter precision, evidence of the Tigers' involvement in murder, persecution, and deportation has been established in international cases, yet there has not been a trial before Serbian courts against an SVG member. Nearly 3 decades have passed since the Tigers disbanded, yet their story continues to echo through the Balkans and beyond. And despite all of this, there remain 0 convictions for their crimes. The Serbian Volunteer Guard disbanded in 1995, but their legacy endures in ways both visible and hidden to this day, and it will continue to do so for generations to come. The demographic maps of Croatia and Bosnia remain permanently altered by the group's campaigns. Mixed communities that had coexisted for centuries replaced by ethnically pure territories achieved through systematic terror. In Bijeljina, Denja, and dozens of other towns, the Tigers succeeded in their ultimate goal, making ethnic diversity itself a casualty of war. The model of state-sponsored paramilitarism has been replicated across the globe, from Wagner Group mercenaries in Ukraine to militia proxies in Syria and Africa. Authoritarian regimes continue to employ the Tigers' playbook, using deniable forces to commit atrocities while maintaining official distance. The pattern remains unchanged. Recruit expendable men, provide professional training and weapons, unleash them on civilian populations, then deny responsibility when the cameras arrive. 28 years after the Dayton Accords, the arithmetic of impunity tells its own story. Over 2,000 civilians were murdered, tens of thousands ethnically cleansed, entire communities erased from existence. 0 prosecutions in Serbian courts for any of these crimes. As Emir Muslu, a Bijeljina survivor, observed with bitter clarity, quoting him, "Arkan was killed, and with him, the entire case went cold." The Tigers achieved something perhaps more valuable than military victory. They escaped history's judgment entirely. Their victims remain unavenged, their crimes unpunished, their methods available for any future tyrant willing to embrace terror as statecraft. The photographs Ron Haviv took in the streets remain among the most damning evidence of war crimes in modern European history. Yet the man kicking that woman's corpse spins records in Belgrade under his wartime nickname. In a world where justice delayed has become justice denied, Arkan's Tigers stand as a warning. When states sponsor terror, then wash their hands of responsibility, the wounds never heal, and the killers never face judgment. Thank you for watching.